Hey there, boys, girls, and flying squirrels. My name is Joe Keyport, and you're listening to the Ear Coffee Podcast. ...2018 has come to an end, and that means it's time to look back at our favorite 2018 local releases. This year, Ear Coffee made a shift from looking at more of a national music spectrum to more of a local, focusing back home on Minnesota and the music we produce here in the Twin Cities specifically. And so we decided, instead of trying to do our list of international and national releases and mixing in some local, we'd focus more on our bread and butter, the people who kind of gave us our community and some of the people and artists we really love to listen to just in general. This podcast was initially supposed to be more of a discussion, a back and forth between Wesley and I, but unfortunately, due to some mishaps and my end just kind of messing up some equipment stuff, that recording is unfortunately unlistened toable. There is some persistent noise that is going on in the background that really makes the discussion Wes and I had very obnoxious to listen to. This podcast, though, is a companion to a article that features kind of a little more in depth into more bands we liked, instead of just being this brief snapshot where we each talk about 1 to 3 releases. We talk 4 or 5 plus a longer list of our favorites, our honorable mentions, and our shout outs. So this is our 2018 year in review right here on the Ear Coffee Podcast.
My first pick for one of my favorite local albums of the year was actually, I'm pretty sure none of them are actually albums, so I don't really know. I'm going to say albums. They're 2 EPs and a single. The first EP I'm going to talk about was the first Stone Arch Isles EP from this year, Kingdoms. The group is I think 6 or 7 piece, very Fleet Foxes influenced local folk group. It's really pleasant album to listen to in such a stressful and painful existence, and a specifically painful year. I kept returning to this album as just something that was really beautiful, really well recorded and written, and just really kind of sunny to listen to. The harmonies, like I said, are super early Fleet Foxy. Fleet Fox is E, if we're going to be grammatically correct here. It's just soaring vocals. The songwriting isn't as adventurous as one might hope from just any release, but you need to appreciate the little things, and the songwriting is still really good. The lyrics are still good. They're the group's second EP from the year, Idle Mind, I believe it was. Joe, fix this in post if I'm wrong. It was a little bit darker. It was also a little bit shorter. I think it was only 4 tracks, and 1 track was an intro, but it wasn't necessarily as enjoyable. Still pretty solid, so check out both. The first one is Kingdoms by Stone Arch Isles. The second one is An Idle Mind. And they also released a random Lucy single called Shorelines, which was decent. Didn't end up on either project. Not really sure what it was, other than just kind of a interim teaser track release. Hopefully we'll hear a more substantial, longer project from the group, because they definitely released some of the best folk music, some of the best just vocal music this year.
My first record is Calvin Heights' Talented Son. This record is the final release from the Angular Noise and indie rock band. It also happens to be their most accessible work of their recent releases. You can kind of split up the band's catalog into 2 phases. There's the early 2014, late 2013 period where they released Self-Untitled, Tales of a Confident Man, and then there was an EP in there, I believe, and that is more of their straight-ahead indie rock sound. They're more stereotypical indie rock sound. And then in 2017, in late 2016, they took a shift into a more experimental mood. Mad scientists Brett Carey and Jordan Whip are able to take the most nebulous sounds and ideas that are float through Carey's head and put them to structure. I wouldn't say putting lightning in a bottle is a good way to describe it, just because it's very, very lazy to describe it that way. But they're able to give defined shape and structure to the noise that floats through Carey's brain. I liken Talented Son to an adult version of 2017's Worst Calligraphy. If Worst Calligraphy was an unhindered and raw art student, Talented Son is the college grad who can take their rawness and filter it through something that is more presentable. It's something that the listener can palate easier and leaves them with something to hum along to. In a way, this record kind of foretold the end of the band. The listener is presented with a non-stop droning downbeat that makes you feel that you need to keep up or with the changing times, or you're just going to get left behind. The beat continues throughout the record and to blend with the overarching storyline in order to create this narrative of a person wrestling with their future. While all of this is extremely heady, and believe me, it is, Talented Son is also one of the most melodic records of their last 3 releases. It's still got all of the aggression and chaos found in older material, but it has hooks and melodies that you can find yourself humming long after the album finishes. Talented Son not only features one of my favorite Calvin Heights songs, but one of my favorite songs in general, which is When You Think of Me. It has the most structure I think a Calvin Heights song can have, but it also leaves the noise and the chaos in there, but gives it a shape, and it gives you something you can hum along with. So if you've heard sections of Calvin Heights' music and either you haven't found it to be your taste or you find it hard to get into, look at Talented Son first before digging into Worst Calligraphy and even looking into The Possession of the Deer's Feet. Talking with Calvin Heights in a couple of interviews on the Ear Coffee podcast, even Brett talks about how unsettling some of those songs are and how hard they are to get into. And I find that Talented Son is the perfect way to jump into not only noise and experimental music, but in some of the later catalog of the band.
All right, so my second pick of just kind of best local music this year is another EP from a band, Early Eyes. It's their All Shades of Teal EP. I believe it's their only release, full-length release from this year. They're an indie pop, kind of indie rock group. Have that kind of sleek, really pleasant, buttery sound that a lot of kind of more poppy indie bands are doing lately. And they really anchor it down with some strong melodies, like the song, their lead single featuring Dizzy Faye, Case for You, which I think has gotten some hype on like the current, so props on that. That's one of the best songs of this year. It's just really pleasant, like really catchy. Like the melodies on the thing are incredible. Like I found myself singing them and just kind of humming along with them even like a couple hours after that, and I have the brain of a squirrel, and I usually don't remember anything unless I listen to it like 13,000 times. And so the fact that they were able to do that, at least in my book, really sets them apart from a lot of other bands, a lot of other songs this year. It was like 5 or so songs, I believe, and all were just really well produced, really clean, fun indie pop tunes. A really good like the vocalist, don't know his name off the top of my head, but he's a great singer. He really carries and leads these songs, leads the group forward with a good sense of gusto and some really high energy performances. That is the Early Eyes EP, All Shades of Teal, one of my favorite releases of this year.
My second record is the Incendiary debut LP from Tongue Party. They did release 2 EPs before this, but they almost seemed like they were lacking something, and I think a lot of what they lacked was the production that creates the punch. They had the fire, the noise, the thrashy elements, but there wasn't that kind of flick in the ear, that punch in the mouth, that kind of picking on you sense that this record gives. And Looking for a Painful Death hits me in the same way Murph's debut album Murph is, but instead of there being a bit of absurdism in your sonic punch in the mouth, there's just a regular punch in the mouth. This record is one that I found myself returning to over and over again since discovering it in September. It's noisy, it's raw, it's just downright aggressive. The vocal production is one of my favorite parts of this record. It's mixed to maintain lyrical clarity while still fitting into the sonic slurry that is the instrumentation. The bass and the guitars often trade roles at times. Instead of having just a low rumbly bass that takes melodic leads while the guitar creates this slow, low, churning fuzz. And it's just this great rumble to come with just the stereo mix of lyrics and vocals coming from the drummer, and I believe the lead vocalist feels like they're screaming on either side of your head in your ears. One of my favorite tracks from this record, and one that I return to often, is Service Please, which has probably my favorite lyric of all time, which is, what can I get for you? I'll rip my fucking eyes out, which feels, if you've ever worked at a coffee shop or at a restaurant or just done anything in the service industry, it kind of provides that malaise and that aggression and disdain you have for your guests on your worst day when you just want them to leave you alone and not have to deal with them. I find this record to be, if you need a morning pick-me-up, you can try this record instead of just having a cup of coffee or just plain old meth.
My last pick is probably my favorite single of the year, and I mean single in the traditional sense, as in that there's an A-side and a B-side, and that is the One More Year Molly single from Nick Check and the Dead Century. They are a quartet of folk rock, kind of punk, folk punk musicians, kind of from the St. Thomas, Minneapolis, St. Paul area. We actually interviewed them earlier this year, did a pretty lengthy piece on the band, which discussed their first EP from last year, Nevada Sun, and their release from this year, which is the single we're talking about. These are two of the best songs that I've heard this year, especially from local musicians. Like, even if this was a grouping or a list of all the songs I heard this year, like ranking, just including local, non-local music, this would still probably be in the top 10, top 5. Both songs are just fantastic. They really take what the band was doing on Nevada Sun, and they kind of encapsulate the two sides that they really do best. They have the longer, more kind of war on drugs-esque piece, One More Year. It has a lot of really great guitar lines. They really let the song breathe, let the songwriting kind of flow very naturally, and it's kind of all the pieces are just moving and kind of shimmering, and it just works together to bring it to an almost 6-minute close. And each minute, each like second almost is not wasted. It really takes advantage of the length that they have decided to perform it on. Molly is a pretty quick song, relatively speaking. It's a very upbeat, energetic little love song, and it kind of emphasizes the more bite-sized, the more punchy energy side of the band. They do both approaches so well here, and it really encapsulates the best aspects of their sound. And I really hope to hear more from the group in a full length coming soon. I say that after every band that I've talked about, but that's because I've talked about 2 EPs and a single, because I don't understand the meaning of the word album. The group also released a single, but not officially. They did a live session of a song called 10 Ton Summer for the University of St. Thomas, like media or whatever, and they had a little awkward interview with them. But the song was great. Even in the live atmosphere, it sounded really good. That means that it'll only sound better once they finally buckle down and record.
And last but certainly not least, I want to talk about Double Grave's EP, Empty Hands. Now, this isn't an album, and before that I had talked about some albums, but this is something I really want to highlight on. I reviewed this record in about May, a month after they released it, for my column, In Pursuit of Something Interesting. And Empty Hands is just a 4-track EP, maybe 10 minutes in length. It's got 2 songs that are just under 2 minutes, and 2 songs that are not quite 4. It's just really quick and short and to the point. But something that struck me about this band is their mix of sludgy noise and melodic pop hooks. You don't find that always done well, or you don't really find it that often in music unless you're really into this kind of stuff. Since I like to highlight a track from each of these releases, I really want to talk about the first song, Raptured, which I think encapsulates a lot of the band really well from this EP. It's upbeat in the sense of it's higher tempo, but it still really features a lot of the aggressive tendencies the band has. And something that really strikes me is the frontman Jeremy Warden's vocal performance, which he sings a lot of his lyrics in a falsetto vocal, so it floats above the chaos and above the mix of guitars and bass and drums in a more ethereal way, and it creates this dreamlike sense, especially with the warbling kind of tremolo guitars that are kind of feel like a My Bloody Valentine, Kevin Shields shoegaze element. It creates this air of surrealism maybe to it, and they don't always shy away from playing a pop hook after they play a heavy breakdown. This band kind of broke up for a hot second, but then didn't. It's kind of interesting. There was some, not drama, but obviously the band members were going through some sort of identity crisis late summer, early fall, and so it seems like the band is back. They're working on new stuff. I know the frontman, again, I think his name is Jeremy Warden. He is releasing music under a solo project called Animal Artist. He just played a gig at the 331 Club right here in Minneapolis. But I think they're back in the studio, or they're working on new music, and hopefully we're going to hear a full length from this band, because I really want to see what they can do over a long period of time, not just what they can do in 10 minutes with 4 songs. I want to hear maybe a overarching story or a longer collection of songs that is more than just listening to both their EPs back to back.
The first shout out I want to give is to the dream pop group Dreams We've Had. Really on the nose name there, but it's appreciated. It's almost not quite tongue in cheek, but it's still pretty good. It's a good band name. They've had a really busy year. They've released a full album, an EP, and 2 singles since then. 1 single just came out a couple weeks ago. I haven't had a chance to check out the last single. It's called Perfectly Out of Place, but if it's anything like the music that the group has released thus far this year, it's going to be a really kind of dreary, longing, but beautiful little selection of dream pop there. Definitely check out their full length from earlier this year called Dear Friend, and their EP from the fall, The World Is Still Beautiful.
For my first shout out, I want to talk about the Shackleton singles they released over the year. They released Genevieve in early December and McMurdo. Genevieve and McMurdo really feel like they were written during their second attempt era. Second attempt was released right before the end of 2017 and features their most popular song, in my opinion, which is Minnesota Girls. If you haven't listened to either of these songs, they are very much a feeling of Connor Oberst mixed with a little bit of edge and just kind of the middle finger. They have this ability to paint these word pictures to make you feel like you're there, or if you're from the Twin Cities, to really give you a shot of where they are in the cities. They definitely give me this vibe that they're going to be what Husker Du... No. The Shackletons definitely give me this vibe that they're going to be what the Hold Steady and Craig Finn and the Replacements are to the Twin Cities in the 80s, what the Shackletons are going to be now. They talk about places people have gone to, like the 7th Street entry off of First Ave, or the Rosedale Mall, or St. Cloud, or all of these places where if you're from the Twin Cities, you know what they're talking about and what they're doing. When they talk about how they're bored teenagers, well, they're not teenagers now, but you kind of know what I mean. Or if you're not from the Twin Cities or from Minnesota, but you come here, you go, oh, that's what they're talking about in that song. It gives you a tangible place to think about while listening. I definitely recommend checking out specifically Genevieve first, which is my favorite of these 2 releases. McMurdo is also very good. Both of them are fiery, and they play them at just breakneck speeds live.
The second group I want to shout out is probably the on man out here. Spelt Milk Collective. They are a jazz fusion-y quartet from the St. Paul area, and they released their album title Redacted earlier this year. We had a great episode of the podcast with them, so check that out. In addition to checking out the music is probably the more important part. Definitely check that out first. They have a really interesting kind of setup, given that they are a jazz band, but they have the kind of the mindset and the wherewithal of a punk band, and they kind of try to wear both hats, if we're going to use that stupid metaphor, try and do both at the same time. And in that way, they're kind of a jazz band.
My second shout out is Heart to Gold's debut full length, which is called Comp. They don't really fit in necessarily with like the kind of. If you don't know who Heart to Gold are, they are a jazz emo punk band from the Twin Cities area, obviously, and they come from the same scene that
they
Remo
really
Drive
do their own
comes
thing,
from.
and that deserves a lot of credit.
Eric Paulson, I believe, produced
given how easy it
this
would
record,
be
as he is
to
kind of an up and comer in the
either way, check out their debut album, title Redacted, out earlier this year.
If you were a big fan of their Still Stuck EP, which is how I learned about them,
but creative jazz fusion album,
Wes and I live a handful of times,
their
and
album and
love this band. They put on a really great show, and one of the things that really sticks out is the heart on the sleeve lyrics mixed with the just brash vocals. It's not screaming in the typical sense of screamo, but it's top of your lungs, shouting like you're shouting at a sports game of some kind. And by saying sports game, you know that I'm not really into sports that much. I'm into music. But Heart to Gold's comp, I definitely would check it out. It really didn't as much. I found myself being too much a fan of Still Stuck to completely get into comp, but every time I listen back to it, I just love the album more and more. I just feel like, it's one of those things where you listen to an album so much that other releases don't kind of not pale in comparison. They almost don't live up to the hype in your brain that you built. But definitely check out Heart to Gold's comp. It's a beautiful record. There's a corgi on the front of it. They're a great live band, and see them live if they come to your city or if they're playing somewhere in the Twin Cities.
Next, I want to do a little 6 degrees of separation here. The bassist of Spelt Milk Collective actually plays and sings in another group called Why Not. They've had a really good year. They went on a huge tour, I believe, with Heart to Gold. They released an album last spring, if I'm not mistaken, and then they had a really great single that came out this summer called Ready for the World. It was produced somehow, I think, connected to Jack Shirley, who's produced like Deaf Heaven and Jeff Rosenstock. So that's kind of bonkers. Yeah, definitely. They released some of the most interesting math rock, kind of punky math. It's really rhythmically adventurous, but it still has that kind of punk energy, that really righteous guitar sound that you get from a lot of the best bands coming out of Minneapolis right now. Anyway, that is the band Why Not. Check out their recent single, Ready for the World, and their second EP, I think it is, or album. Either way, it's called Spring Cleaning. It's a good release. Henry Breen is the bassist in both Spelt Milk and Why Not. He's kind of getting around here, and he is showing off his talents in a lot of different ways, so shout out to Henry. Next, want to give a brief shout out to Heart to Gold. They released their debut album, Comp, this year. It's a really great punk album.
And then my third and final release I want to talk about is Jed LaPlante's The third and final shout out I want to give is Jed LaPlante's debut record as well, I'll See You Again. Jed LaPlante is a peer of mine, I should say. We both went to the University of Northwestern St. Paul, and I've had the luxury of playing with him. I played brass for him when he played a show at the Underground Music Cafe in St. Paul. Jed LaPlante is from the Great White North. He is from not near the Canadian border, but for anybody who doesn't live north of like Cambridge or North Branch, you expect it to be in Canada. But Jed LaPlante is from up there, and he and the whole LaPlante family are these great bluegrass players, and that's what you'll find on this Bob Dylan influenced folk and bluegrass music. I'll See You Again was born out of a time of hurting and a period of self-reflection. Unfortunately, Jed LaPlante's father has passed away, but after he graduated college, he took his motorcycle and he just went on this long trip across the western United States, which feels very much like a Kerouac novel. He got on his motorcycle, he took whatever he could carry in a backpack and in his saddlebags, and he just left to go on this reflection. And by the time he came home, he had, I wouldn't say left those feelings out on the Western Plains, but he definitely came back feeling a sense of healing, maybe, and a sense that he has gotten some closure on this chapter in his life. And what grew out of it was this record. It's full of great stories and word pictures that make you feel like you're there watching it. If you're a fan of Trampled by Turtles or The Pines, you'll really love Jed LaPlante's I'll See You Again. And I believe the video is still up. If you follow him on Facebook, his Facebook page, you can see the live stream of the record. He played with Landon Paul, who released another solo album, who released another debut record this year. Both of them are very similar in their singer-songwriter aspects. But I would definitely recommend checking out I'll See You Again by Jed LaPlante.
Next, I'm going to do a kind of a back-to-back shout-out of two groups that I covered in my local music roundup column. May it rest in peace temporarily. It'll hopefully be back in the new year, since I will force myself to have more time and be more consistent, because that was really enjoyable part of my work for Ear Coffee. Anyways, I just want to shout out Atomic Cafe and Kate Malinaffi. Atomic Cafe released an EP earlier this year called Further. It's really good, kind of indie pop, indie rock album. A lot of good songs, really catchy. Just it sticks with you right away, and it hooks your attention. Like if an album, like I know from the first song, usually if I'm going to enjoy an album, even just an EP, and even if it's just that one song, like if it's something can hook me that intensely, that soon on, that quickly, there's something special about it. So definitely check out Atomic Cafe's Further EP. Anyway, so Kate Malinaffi released her debut solo EP called In and Under. It's a really haunting, beautiful collection of, I think, four songs. And it's mostly just piano and voice. I think there's some strings on one of the songs. It's been a hot minute since I listened to it. I just remember it kind of stopped me dead in my tracks, like how just eternal and just like the EP sounds like an oak tree. Like it's just been there forever, and it's just like so awe-inspiring and amazing. Like my jaw just hit the floor when I heard this. Like her voice is so freaking incredible. And I like the songwriting was good just on a first listen basis. I haven't really sat with it as much as I would have liked to, and as much as I should have if I were a good music critic. But it just haunted me. Like it is so ethereal and beautiful. So definitely check out In and Under, the first EP from Kate Malinaffi. She's also a member of Keep for Cheap. They've released some stuff this year, I'm not mistaken. If not, they are playing shows all the time, so go check them out. From what I have heard, they have some good material as well. All right, one of the last groups I want to shout out is the Clean Tramps. They're a quartet, not really sure, out of the Twin Cities. Kind of really sleek. I'm really drawn to a lot of like kind of sleek, well-produced music this year, especially given how lo-fi a lot of the more well-known music coming out of the Twin Cities right now can be. That's not a knock. I do enjoy like that punky stuff, but I'm a sucker for some really good produced indie pop. And I think they've only had 3 singles out this year. I feel like they had more back when I first wrote about them in like June or July, but that means that they went through and deleted it. Okay, they're a quartet. I'm guessing that given that their cover photo only has 4 people in it. But I've also seen pictures of them with like 5 of them, so I really don't know. Anyways, they've only released 3 singles this year from what Bandcamp is currently telling me. In-Betweeners and Poison are 2 great songs. Both are really great songs, really catchy, really enjoyable, just really good indie pop. Again, with really good vocals. Like I think the reason I'm drawn to good vocals so much is that I wish I could sing, and I can't. So when I hear someone who can sing, I get really mad, and I enjoy it out of spite. That is probably the explanation, but they just have a really good energy, a really good dynamic between the 4 of them. Like you can hear each person doing their own thing, but it still sounds very cohesive. They released a demo in November, and I feel like they released something more recently. But they released a demo for a song called Pulls. The album art is just some feet sticking out of a stall, so that is hopefully indicative of the fact that it is a bar song. It is actually a Hold Steady cover about alcohol. Either way, check out their most recent releases, Pulls. It's just a demo, so hopefully they'll have a fully produced version of that coming out soon. Maybe a EP. Like I feel like it's time for an EP, boys. Come on, you already got 3 songs at least. Just slap it all together and put in a nice little bow and put it on that Spotify, so I can keep track of it and add it to a playlist and gentrify the hell out of you. Also, definitely check out In-Betweeners and Poison, 2 of the 2 other songs that they released this year. Those 2 are definitely great. Pulls, even as a demo, I'm guessing, is a good time as well. The last group I wanted to shout out is Juniper Douglas. Anyways, but they released their debut album this year, Errored Introspection, and it is one of the most bizarre albums I've probably ever heard, especially heard this year. It really goes for it. I don't know what baseball is. Let's just go for that. They try everything pretty much anytime. It sounds like anytime any of them had an idea, they just threw it in there. And while that is admirable, it doesn't always pay off. One of the last songs on the project, it's like 9 minutes long, one of the two really lengthy songs on the album. And it's just a sound collage of like them doing whatever they wanted. And I think someone talks about like pooping. I don't know. It's just like, it really bummed me out when I was reviewing the album. Given that the previous longer song actually was like kind of krautrocky. It knew what it was doing. It was much more deliberate instead of just a sound collage of kind of BS that they did at the end kind of for fun, and it's just a bunch of in-jokes. Fortunately, the rest of the album is mostly not like that. It's still really experimental. Like I said, there's a couple 10-minute songs, and each song is almost like, it flows really well, but each song is still its kind of own idea. And sometimes there's like pairs, like couplets of songs that kind of work together, work with a really similar sound frame, and then the next song is completely different. And like one of the lead singles, Fiba Master Plan, I don't know. It's something like that. It's a really long word, but it sounds like a early Radiohead cut. And it's probably the most cohesive song on the album, or at least one of them. Probably one of the best. It's definitely one of the best songs on the album. One of my favorites. It's got really weird mumbled vocals you can't really understand, but just the voice kind of comes in and out with how intense it is. And it really layers, like the instruments layer on top of each other. Like there's a synth line and then a guitar line, and it builds like a layer of, like in the Grand Canyon, there's like layers of like sediment or whatever, like going up, down, all the way up the cliffside. It sounds like that, except it's with like different like computerized synth lines and guitar effects and stuff. And all over it, just the voice is just screaming its heart out and it's hitting these really falsetto-y notes. That probably explains the Radiohead. It's just sad bleep loops and screaming. But it is really good sad bleep loops and screaming. I almost can't... I wrote like 1,100 words on the album, but I still can't find a way to just concisely describe it. It's a completely unique experience, and I encourage anyone that is interested in the band or just experimental music locally to check it out. The album is called Error to Introspection.
Thank you guys for listening to our ramblings here on the Ear Coffee podcast. This podcast is a companion to an article you can find on our website, earcoffee.blogspot.com, and it's Ear Coffee with 3 E's, so it's COFFEEE. Unfortunately, we couldn't get a real domain, and we are hoping to work on getting a real website and a blog up and running and reviving the blog. Those of you who are fans of us know that we have been rather silent, except for the podcast, since about October, and we really want to get back into writing about local music and giving our opinions on music and reviewing music and really shining a spotlight on the people doing really cool things coming out of the Twin Cities, because honestly, we're some of the best music from around the country and maybe around the world.
Definitely check out our kind of back catalog of podcast interviews. Check out everything we've shouted out or discussed in this episode. We've covered a lot of good music this year, and all of it deserves more recognition than it probably gets, because it is totally worth it. It is authentically Minnesotan, and it is just some of the best stuff I've heard this year, and I am honored to have written about it, to have interviewed some of these people, and just to have been a part of this community.
Again, I want to thank you for listening to this podcast. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and then on the blog itself. My name is Joe Keyport, speaking for Wesley Mullenberg, who unfortunately we were not able to reconnect in order to re-record this podcast. We hope you had a great 2018, and here's looking at the local music scene in 2019.